Okay. So today we are finishing evolution, and then we're going to talk a little bit about taxonomy, how organisms are classified, how we group them, different species, how we, compare them, similarities and differences. And then what else? Taxonomy. We're going to look at a little bit at what we call a phylogenetic tree and how those are constructed. They are evolutionary trees. They actually tell the history of an organism and how it evolved over time. New traits that emerged throughout the evolution of organisms, really, from the beginning. I mean, these trees, there's so many that are still being worked on to this day with new genetic technology and altered and manipulated based on new findings and stuff. So it's pretty amazing. Just really constructing how life began 4 billion years ago. But yeah, I'm ready to get started. Are there any questions before we begin about anything? And yeah, any questions? Nope. Okay, let's do it then. Okay, so go ahead and go to my slides here. So just a little bit of a recap, sort of, very quickly. This will work. All right. Okay, so like I said, we're continuing evolution, but this time we're not discussing natural selection. This time we're going to be talking about other ways that populations of organisms evolve, other mechanisms, different mechanisms, ways in which organisms can change over time. So I mentioned last time that evolution, right? I tried to hammer in this point very early on, that evolution is this general change in these, what we call heritable characteristics or traits, physical traits that can be inherited or passed on to offspring. The gradual change in these characteristics over time. And it was a general change. But I made sure to tell you that whatever caused that change, there are about 4 or 5 different ways that change can occur in a population of deer or mice or elephants, a population of insects, you name it. So we discussed one in great detail last time. We talked about natural selection, which is really the most famous, powerful example that Charles Darwin founded and wrote about in his book. This was the most powerful mechanism for evolutionary change. It just explained so much that we see. So much that we see, in fact, that we call it a theory of evolution by natural selection. But don't remember, I'd use all rectangles are squares, but not all squares are rectangles. So all examples of natural selection are examples of evolution, but not all examples of evolution are examples of natural selection. And we're going to look at some other ways that organisms can change over time. And the first one we're going to talk about that we left off at is artificial selection, which is obviously very different than natural selection. It's not natural, it's artificial. Human caused and manipulated. So that's the first one we're going to discuss. So evolution continued. So let's continue. Artificial selection. I don't know what it says after. It's blocking. Oh well. does that say? Hold on, I think I can move this. Oh, with examples, okay. Yeah, so we're gonna look at some examples, and we're gonna also talk about just what I mean by artificial selection. So, okay. Basically, artificial selection is also called selective breeding. Oh, I bought some new markers, so I'm excited to use them. It's kind of dark in here because of the clouds to me. Okay. So another term for artificial selection is selective breeding. So AKA selective breeding. And what this is, it's a selective process by humans, artificial. Remember how last time when we talked about natural selection, we really talked about how the environment is dictating who lives and who dies, and who passes on their traits because they lived, who is able to reproduce at a higher rate based on the adaptations, right? Their abilities to obtain food or evade a predator, maybe be resistant to a disease like an antibiotic, or even just antibiotic resistant bacteria. Ability to live in that environment is selected for. Well, in artificial selection, we select. We are the environment, if you want to say that. So we're selecting for desirable traits that either will make us more money or give us a crop that is desirable. Usually it's for an economic, commercial type purpose. So we selectively breed. So let's look at a few examples of what I mean by this. Desired traits. So Belgian blue cattle, so they have a lot of meat, lot of muscle tissue that, of course, would be used for meat production. So really what's happening, and remember last time we talked about as well, mutation and that way in which new traits can come about. Well, what artificial selection really is it's breeding a lot of cattle. And when you have all these cattle offspring, you're gonna increase the chance that a mutation will occur because you're having more and more offspring. Remember, these mutations were random, changes in DNA. And we're gonna increase the chance of having a desired trait. And you notice that, okay, one of these offspring has more muscle mass. So you take that cattle, you take that organism, and you breed it with another one that had increased meat. And then all of a sudden, you just selected for genes by yourself. The environment did not have a role in that at all. It was you. And that's all it is. It is human beings playing that selective role. And there's a lot of examples of this that are pretty, maybe you weren't aware of them. And the reason they exist is because of this process. But so that's one example. Prize winning horses are selectively bred. You know, these thoroughbreds that have, you know, they're really fast. They have great stamina. So the smaller offspring, when the professional breeders would notice that they had these really desired traits, they would breed them together to kind of conserve those traits and keep them going. And you know, it's kind of like if you even go to like a dog breeder, the dog breeders, they have already, you know, they already know what the offspring are going to be like. So people kind of line up for like very, how would I say, good dog breeders, ones that are well established, because they know that they've selected parents that maybe that they don't bark as much or they don't shed. Desired traits, right? And speaking of dogs, funny enough, dogs, like I said, this bullet point here, thousands of years humans have been doing this sort of thing, especially with farming and desired crops that have bigger yields maybe, and cross-fertilizing those types of plants. But interestingly enough, dogs, all dogs, have a common ancestor, which is actually the wolf. Wolves are pretty old mammals. They've been around a long time, but Chihuahuas have not. Sadly, Chihuahuas wouldn't really survive the natural selective forces that Darwin described. I don't think so, at least. Maybe they could hide in like a small crevice, I don't know. But all dog breeds descended from wolves because of us and because of our domestication of dogs. And so these variations started to emerge. And remember, this is long time, thousands of years of breeding. So you're going to see high rates of variations come about. And then all of a sudden, this dog is so fluffy and cute. Oh, breed them. I want more. Oh, we're going to sell them now. Golden retrievers. Let's sell them and make money because they're so sweet and they don't, whatever. So, yeah, so that's just an interesting fact. These different types of dog, whether you want a big dog, small dog, it's all based on this selective breeding process. Okay. And this last one's very interesting. Who likes broccoli? I think I'm making salmon and broccoli tonight, depending if I have the willpower not to get a burger. Yeah, it's so funny. I asked this last semester and there were so many people in the class that were like, I love broccoli. I was like, really? Maybe if you like roast it with garlic and stuff, it's like pretty good. But anyways, good to hear. Broccoli would not exist, just like these dogs and prize-winning horses, if it were not for human beings. I kid you not, because we bred so many, they come from the wild mustard plant. In fact, all of these different vegetables came from one species of wild mustard. Crazy. And so you breed thousands and thousands of wild mustard plants, and all of a sudden, you get a mutation that suppresses the flower development and it looks like broccoli, or sterility of the flowers and you get cauliflower. So it's enlargement of leaves, it's kale. And so because we bred so many of them and one mutation is all it takes, or, you know, so it's like, oh my gosh, look at this plant. Let me try eating it. Oh, this is great. Let's breed one of these with another one that came about randomly. Remember, this is thousands of years of, you know, breeding, and you're like, oh my gosh, let's just keep breeding these two with these genes, these traits, and keep it selected for, really. So I thought that's a pretty amazing example of artificial selection. So again, it's not whether or not you live or die that you pass on your genes, and it's, you know, these genes have a benefit of allowing you to reproduce more because you didn't die. but it's really because we wanted you to live. We wanted you because of some economic purpose, or you taste good, or you're adorable. It's a very human type process. Okay. Next one. So that was artificial selection. The next one, sometimes grouped together with natural selection, but really it stands out on its own. Oh, my legs. Okay, so this one's called sexual selection. I got new markers, but this red still doesn't look that great. It's annoying. I think I gotta get the chisel one. It's like darker. I don't know. Anyways. Okay, so sexual selection is the next one. So I won't use this. So sexual selection is when female mate choice leads to the selection of certain traits in males. Certain traits in males. And the most famous example of this is the colorful feathers of a male peacock. Colorful feathers of the male peacock. And because I just thought of this, I'm just gonna, I don't know why, colorful. Oops. Rob, I'm teaching right now. I'll call you back later.
No, don't call me. Call me tomorrow. I'm super busy. I just wanted to call you back and tell you I love you. And we're both hustling.
Rob, bye, I love you. Sorry, my brother. I told him I'm teaching right now. He's very stressed and busy renovating a house, so I hung up on him, but he's good. All right, so sexual selection is really very an interesting force of evolution here, because it is a selective pressure towards and promoting the survival and reproduction of certain males, really. In nature, you often find that the female is choosing the male based on certain characteristics, and they're often have to do with how the male looks, and even how the male, there's some that do mating rituals. Very, very fascinating. So let me show you the picture here. So there's the peacock. So yeah, these guys with the long colorful trains, those are the males. This is a peahen. It's the female. And the real mechanism, the reason this occurs has to do mostly with the fact that they are more noticeable. And here's another example of these two birds. The males want, of course, to woo the female or get its attention so that they can reproduce. Of course, this is why it gets grouped in with natural selection sometimes. This is a very objective sort of way that you're going to increase reproduction rate. Natural selection, it was whether you live or die. Of course, if you're alive, better chance of reproducing than if you're dead. But here, it's whether you're getting noticed or not by the female. So it's kind of interesting. And if you get noticed, or if you have the longer train and you're like, hey, I have prettier colors than this dude, the female is going to choose you. And you're going to pass those genes on. And so over time, you see evolution. You see more and more the males that have those genes of being able to get the female's attention. It's very funny and not too dissimilar than humans, is it? Except for humans, it doesn't work sometimes. So yeah. Any questions about sexual selection or artificial selection? All righty, cool. Let's see. Okay, just reviewing my notes. So let's move on. So now we've talked about two mechanisms other than natural selection that are going to cause evolution of organisms. Let's go. Oh, I feel like we did this last time. Maybe not. What is incorrect about this? Natural selection and evolution are the same thing. What's incorrect about that statement? It's tough and it's subtle, so I'll just tell you. Oh, okay, gotta fix my slides. Let's write it. Let me erase and let's write it. Even better, let's write it down. So natural selection is one mechanism that causes evolution. So they're not really the same thing. Evolution, again, is this change over time in a population. And natural selection is one force that might cause that, but there are others, as we're learning today. And so far, we've talked about two additional forces: artificial by human beings, and then sexual selection as well. Okay. Now on to our next. Oh, crap. Thanks, Addie. Sorry. I forget. Zoom and all. Here you go. There you go. Okay, you got it. What's next? Okay, so we've got, let's see, three more mechanisms to discuss. So let's do it. Here's the next one. It's very, very interesting mechanism here. And because I'm going to write on the whiteboard, we'll go to the whiteboard. Okay, so there's this term, or I guess definition group, classification, I don't know. Term works, called genetic drift, okay? So genetic drift, and like I said, we're gonna be talking about 3 more mechanisms that can cause evolution. 2 of those 3 are considered genetic drift. And what is genetic drift? Genetic drift is defined as genetic changes that occur in a population. So genetic changes that occur in populations due to random events not because of natural selection. So this is random events, not because of natural selection. I'll move out of the way in just a moment. Okay. So genetic drift is random. It's random change that occurs. So natural selection, in contrast, was a very, I would say, purposeful, sort of, it had a sort of, how could I describe? The actual selective pressure in natural selection selected for individuals to survive based on certain traits. Based on certain traits. So there was sort of a, gotta think of another word for it, but yeah, purpose to it. And it wasn't random. Random wouldn't have anything to do with the traits that the organisms have. So we're going to look at these 2 mechanisms of evolution that have nothing to do with the traits that these populations have, and I'll explain what I mean. So the first one is called the founder effect. The first example of genetic drift is called the founder effect. So I'm going to write it up here. Okay. So this is our first example of genetic drift, the founder effect. And this is when a small group of individuals we call them founders, establish a new population elsewhere. Establish a new population elsewhere, bringing with them their traits, their genetics. So, all right, bringing, sort of running out of room here, so I'll erase this part. Bringing their traits / characteristics with them. And we can even add their DNA, their genes, their genetics. That can be passed on. Okay. So there are a few famous examples of founder effect, but actually I'll keep it on the whiteboard. I know probably people are still writing, so I'll keep it there for a moment. Okay. So this is a picture of an Amish mother and her child. So the Amish, brand new population from an original colony of settlers. And so the founder effect is actually, so what happens is when you have this original population of people and a small group of them decide to establish a new settlement somewhere else, a new population, they bring their traits with them. And it really, the genetic makeup of these people does not really represent the entire population. So if you had, keep the numbers simple, let's say you had 100 people and 3 of them said, hey, I want to start a new religion, or I want to move because I hate everyone, or whatever, or they're starting a new thing, or they can't get food, whatever it is. Let's go find another place so maybe we can get food. Well, the genetics of these 3 people might not represent the 97 others at all. And that's why the frequency of certain inherited disorders, such as, I'll show you here. So this is Ellis Van Creveld syndrome. So polydactyly, the child has an extra digit on each of her hands. This disorder is high amongst the Amish because this population was started by a very small group. And even if one of them had that gene is going to populate, it's going to propagate. It's going to be more common in that group, especially if it's isolated and they're not bringing in new genes to sort of dilute it out. So you find the frequency of these disorders in founder effect type situations. just keeping in mind that the smaller the group, the higher the chance that there will be a disorder present or something present in that population that's unlike the original population that might have been selected out. Now, keep in mind, this is genetic drift, right? It's totally random. So those 3 people with the genetics of maybe that syndrome or a different one, totally random. Yes, they wanted to start a new population based on religious beliefs. That's a little more purposeful and directive, but their genetics is random. That's why founder effect is considered genetic drift, whereas natural selection is sort of really with a great purpose going to select for those that can survive in that environment. Here, it's just picking really 3 people based on religious beliefs, but their genetics have nothing to do with that, right? Nothing to do with their religious beliefs. And so that's why we consider it genetic drift. Does that make sense? The next example of genetic drift is very, very striking as to why this is a random process of a population's genetics changing over time. And it's called the bottleneck effect. So this is our second example of genetic drift. Called the bottleneck effect. Okay. Okay, so the bottleneck effect. It's my little diagram. So the bottleneck effect, go back to the whiteboard. So this is when a small population decreases in size as a result of a natural disaster. As a result of a natural disaster. So actually, I'll add on to that. As a natural disaster leading to a random loss, and just to use the same terminology, a random loss of traits, characteristics, genetics. Traits, characteristics, genetics. Running out of room. Oh, crap. Can you see now? I was kind of in the way. So this says, a small population decreases in size as a result of a natural disaster, leading to a random loss of traits, characteristics, genetics. in that population. So natural disaster, what are some examples of natural disasters? We're experiencing one right now all over California, sadly. Yeah, so I'm gonna just underline this here and write some examples. Fire, hurricane, earthquake, flood, yeah, exactly. Totally ran out of room. Earthquake, floods, yeah. So we call this a bottleneck, a genetic bottleneck. So importantly, we group this as a genetic drift type of event because it's a random process. Natural disaster does not, 99.9% of the time, an earthquake, a fire, isn't really going to purposefully select for certain individuals of a population to survive. Doesn't matter whether you're better at obtaining food or camouflage, like natural selection, right? Those were mechanisms to help survive and reproduce. Well, that doesn't matter. Whether you're better at getting food or you're good at avoiding predators to survive, that doesn't help you avoid an earthquake if you're camouflaged into the canyon, as that example we used last time, or a fire or a hurricane, whatever it is. So it leads to this random loss of your adaptations. And oftentimes a bottleneck can leave that population less adapted, less fit. I didn't really mention the term fitness, evolutionary fitness, but really all it means is a measure of how capable an organism is to survive. If an organism has a high amount of fitness, it has a high chance of survival and reproduction. But the gene pool, the population that we're looking at after a genetic bottleneck, after a natural disaster, may be less fit. It might have wiped out all the mice that blend in really well. And the mice that are left over are the ones that are easily visible to the hawk. It's totally random. So now does it become more clear what I mean by natural selection is a much more purposeful, sort of has a logic to it. Whereas this doesn't at all. It's very random. Doesn't matter if you're adapted or not. The selective force is going to randomly choose who dies versus, oh, you're not blended in. I can see you, hawk, die, boom. Or maybe with the video we watched, oh, you don't have a long enough beak to obtain food in the flowers, nectar, right? Ringing a bell. That's a very purposed selective force that will cause those birds to die off. Earthquake has no selective direction to it. And it's a similar story with the founder effect. The group that decides to go off is randomly religious. Yeah, or religious. It could be trying to find food. Their genes have nothing to do with that. Okay, I hope that clears it up a little bit. It's very subtle. There's no doubt about that. But just keeping in mind, this is a random process of survival and reproduction. Okay, there's one left. One more mechanism that can drive evolutionary change in a population. And it is called gene flow. Here's the picture. Oh, by the way, the reason or what this represents for the bottleneck, you could say that these red marbles are better adapted individuals, or even, actually, let's say the green are, because there's a lot of green, right? Let's say they're better adapted, have higher fitness, and higher chance of reproduction. But now, after the bottleneck, the hurricane or the fire, whatever it is, there's less green than there was to begin with, maybe. Even though this natural selection would have selected for the green. But because this is random, more green maybe were in the earthquake area or burned from the fire, and less adapted individuals that have a less chance of survival, less fitness, more of those remained. So that's what the picture is showing. And the red were completely wiped out. Okay. So our last mechanism here is called gene flow. Gene flow. Okay. Gene flow, this is not considered genetic drift, by the way. Gene flow. A little more purposeful behind gene flow. So gene flow is genetic change that occurs in a population because of the migration kind of underline that, of new individuals into and out of existing populations. So gene flow is merely a matter or a mechanism caused by migration. So if we look at the example shown here from the textbook, you see that there's this deer population that lives west of this mountain range. And they have this lighter fur color. And then you have deer on the east side. And they have a darker fur color. And essentially, allele, that word will make sense when we do genetics. So don't worry about that. It's just, a type of characteristic. And so this type of characteristic is a lighter fur color. And when they migrate to the other population and they breed, they've introduced a new variant to this eastern population just because of the migration. So that's what gene flow is, and it's shown here with the red and the blue. So you're going to see, again, evolution, change over time in this eastern population and west, because they left, right? So maybe they brought some type of, they might have had some mutation, in some other fashion and left. So both populations really are changing. Yeah, so Sophia asked if one deer population has their fur changed. That's exactly right. So what happens is when these two breed, or when this population that maybe was separated for a long time, enough so that they look very different, still the same, there's no species barrier so they can reproduce, but they're bringing their variations with them, and when they have offspring, these variations, again, remember, are heritable. They are able to be transferred to the offspring genetically, kind of like your parents look a lot like you. They gave you their traits. So these deer bring their light fur color, and they might have offspring with lighter fur color because they brought those traits from this population. And so over time, you'll see that change in the traits of that population. Wasn't really a matter of survival, though, as in natural selection. Isn't a matter of sexual selection. It's just due to the fact of migration. Okay. So I think that's it. Oh, kind of a practice problem of sorts. So in 2004, scientists announced that they discovered fossils of extremely short humans on this island, Flores. So this new species was named. And so hypothesis that this new species evolved from Homo erectus, which was another early human species. What type of evolutionary event does this represent? So it's this, or they became isolated, right, on this remote island. I didn't mention that. Should have mentioned that right here. So they evolved from Homo erectus when they became isolated on this island. Yeah, that's founder effect, exactly. So this original population of Homo erectus, a few of them left and went to this isolated island and bred with each other. Kind of like the Amish a little bit in that regard. And a few of them, or maybe even one, because it's a small number, that founded this new population of humans on this island, had extremely short stature. So over being isolated for who knows how long on this island and having a population there, it conserved it there, that gene, as they kept getting passed on and on. So great, founder effect. Okay, 15 minutes, perfect. Should be just the amount of time to discuss our last topic. Okay, so phylogenetics, taxonomy, related to evolution, but we're pretty much done with evolutionary change, as it were. So let's talk about the phylogenetic tree of life. Okay, so first thing I want to say, what a phylogenetic tree is. So let's stop the share. I hesitate to use the red, but I'll say what I write here. Phylogenetic trees. I'll use the black now. Phylogenetic trees, what are they? They represent evolutionary relationships among groups of organisms. And this is based on shared characteristics and genetic, so this is meaning DNA, similarities. Remembering that our genetics, our genes, code for our traits. I have a gene for brown hair, darker colored hair. My DNA has a message that says, hey, brown hair. That'll make a lot more sense when we talk about the molecular biology lecture. But just notice or understanding that these trees are constructed based on the similarities genetically of organisms, meaning their traits. So I'm going to do a sort of template of how it's how these trees are created. Give you one more minute. Oh, based on shared characteristics. Okay. So if we're doing the tree of life, so just the entire tree, I suppose, we'll start with the root of the tree. So this would mean the oldest ancestor. So, right, it's a tree of life, and I mentioned when we looked at theory and the cell theory that we're all composed of cells. All life is created of cells, and all cells come from cells before it. So what that means is that all life began as one cell. And we're going to learn about what defines a cell, what's inside a cell, what it's doing among different organisms, how the cell even became many cells over time. We're going to talk a lot about all of that. but this is sort of a general learning about how these trees work. So if we have the oldest ancestor, which is a cell, it'll extend out here and branch off. And this will be, let's call it group A. Let's call that group A. Branch off here as well. Go here, branch again. This is group B. And then we'll just do one more. This will be groups C and group D. So this is just kind of a template. One of the schools I worked at, Palomar actually, they have in their bio department hallway, they have the actual tree of life. It's insane, massive, but it all starts from one. It's pretty amazing. So the way these work, you have these different groups, and the way they're kind of constructed, the first thing I'll tell you is that as they extend vertically, it's time. So this is in the past, and then we extend upward towards the present. This is the present. And then we also have these, we have these shared traits, and it explains why we categorize the groups the way we do. So here we would have a shared trait, or a trait shared by all the groups, by A, B, C, and D. And we'll look at a specific example of a tree on the next slide. But how they branch off and diverge like this throughout time and as species evolve, some traits are lost, some traits are gained. And so let's say this new trait emerges that a group of organisms, group A, does not have, but B, C, and D do. So trait shared by B, C, and D. But not A. And then group B branches off and we have the emergence of a new trait that C and D have, B does not. Remember, this is throughout time as evolution is occurring. So trait shared by C and D. And that's how the trees work. Okay, this is a bit abstract, I guess would the word be. So let's look at an actual example of a tree, a phylogenetic tree. So this is pretty cool. Okay. So we could say at the root here would be an ancient common ancestor to vertebrate animals. So we're going to be looking at vertebrates here. So vertebrae developed over time from some invertebrate, and we got the emergence of new species. So let's say a couple million years go by and a bony skeleton evolves, but then sharks don't have that. Sharks are very ancient. So the bony skeleton comes about, and over time, now it's important to keep in mind, remember that this is the present, right? So maybe sharks did exist back then, but amphibians might not have. In fact, they didn't. But a common ancestor did. And once the bony skeleton emerged, the fish came about, these ray fin fish, and then 4 limbs as this transition to land. And they branch out because they don't have 4 limbs. Here come the amphibians. Over time, this amniotic egg trait emerges, which all of these species would have, right? Amniotic egg is a it's a water-based placenta egg kind of thing, or not placenta, but has nutrients within the egg, and they weren't just in the open without a nutrient source or even protection. That's what an amniotic egg is. It has that protection and nutrient source. So that evolved. So if I were to ask you, let me ask you, which, let's see. Yeah, so let me ask you which of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which of these 7 groups has 2 post-orbital fenestrae, based on what we learned with how the trees are made? Nice. The crocs, dinos, and birds, exactly. So they share that trait. I asked which of these groups have 2 post-orbital fenestrae, which are these, like, I had to Google it myself. It's very interesting. It's like these anatomical holes in the skull that allow for muscles in the eyes to like extend and retract or something. It's really interesting. But crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds, right? So the shared trait extends outward. And when it branches off, the species don't have 2 post-orbital fenestrae, the primates and rodents and rabbits, when you see that branching off kind of thing. But outward and upward here, they both have it. And it's kind of like, which ones have 4 limbs? Everything upward from 4 limbs. But ray fin fish branched off before that, as well as sharks. So that's how that works. It's these new traits coming about through mutation, as we learned, over millions of years. This process takes millions of years. This is an evolutionary process of change in populations. And so this is how we construct these trees. Okay, where are we at? Oh, almost out of time. Okay, what else did I want to discuss? Okay, last thing, because we're running out of time here. The classification of organisms, we call it the hierarchy of classification. This is also known as taxonomy. So I'm gonna stop the share. So hierarchy of classification. And this is how we classify groups of organisms, how we put them into different groups and what we call them. And the order goes like this. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order. There's a lot of species on the planet, so a lot of different groups, sub classifications. So after order comes family. Ran out of room, but I'm just continuing down. I'll just continue here. So after family comes genus, and last is species. As we go down, we are getting more specific. So, boom, boom, more specific. So to end the lecture, let's look at an example of this. So we're going to look at the wolf here. Here's the wolf. And its species name is, its scientific name is Canis lupus, but it's in kingdom Animalia. Domain, it's not included here. I wish it were. The domain is Eukarya, so I'll write that on the board too. Well, domain's there, so that's good enough. That's all you'll have to know. It starts with domain. It's in domain Eukarya. Kingdom, it's an animal, Animalia. It's a chordate, so it's in phylum Chordata. Class, it's a mammal, Mammalia. Order, Carnivora, and you'll start to notice that as we get further down, we start to lose some organisms, like the koala is a mammal, but it's not a carnivore. Family, Canidae. Genus, Canis. Species, Canis lupus. Commonly known as a wolf. Last thing I'll say, because there might be a test question on it. I know I'm over a minute, but we kind of started a minute late. So let me just say the last thing, I promise. Scientific name consists of the genus and the species. So Canis lupus is the genus and then the species. So whether you're talking to a scientist in Spain, speaking Spanish, or in Hungary, or Russia, whatever it is, Germany, speaking different languages, Canis lupus, they'll know what you're talking about. The scientific name for an organism is universal, but the wolf, the common name, or like a bear for whatever the bear is for genus and species, those are common names, American English names that wouldn't be recognized everywhere. So the scientific name is the genus and the species. It's kind of like a first and a last name for the organism. That's the scientific name. Okay. And if you're wondering if you have to know the order of that, yes, you do. I might have a question about which one's more specific, right? A good way to remember it, okay, I'm 3 minutes over, I'm sorry. This is the last thing, I promise. Dear King Philip cried out for great soup. I'll say that one more time and that's it, I promise. I'm the worst, I know. Dear King Philip cried out for great soup. I can say it one more time if you want. Dear King Philip cried out for great soup. Just to remember the order. It's a, what's it called? Acronym? Mnemonic? Oh, yeah. Cried out for great soup. Yeah, right. Cried out for great, what else could he cry out for? Oh, I think I know what you're thinking of. Maybe. I don't know. Okay. Well, all right. So that's it. So let's take like a 5-minute break, and then I'll do the lab mini lecture on natural selection. So 4:25. Let's come back here. 4:25. Music intermission.